Prosperity in Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to Heartbeat. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Heartbeat. I am your host, Cindi Bright. Thank you for joining us tonight as we have a special on Heartbeat where we are actually going to host a debate this evening for the Seattle community on Initiative 135. Initiative 135 is on your ballots right now. There is a special election. Many of you have already voted, but many of you are still asking the questions, how do I vote on this particular initiative? This evening, we are thrilled and honored to have three esteemed guests with us on Heartbeat to debate this issue. Debate is a loose word. I'll say we're going to discuss it. I have two guests that represent the pro I-135 side, and I have one guest that represents the con side to this. This is not typical what we do on Heartbeat, but I am thrilled to be the moderator for this conversation tonight because this is about prosperity for Black America. So Initiative 135 is about, the term is social housing. And so we all know that housing in our community, having access to housing, having access to affordable housing is a huge issue here in the state of Washington. So much so, in fact, it is the number one issue in the state legislative session as we speak. So let me just welcome three of our guests here tonight. What I'm going to do is a little different than normal because I'm going to, some of the conversation, we're going to kind of time it a little bit tonight because I want to make sure that both sides of this issue have an opportunity to speak. And then you will have an opportunity after this show tonight to cast your vote. So let me begin by, I'm just going to introduce their names and where they're from, and then I'm going to turn it over to them to allow them to introduce themselves. They will each have 5 minutes to introduce themselves and their position on this issue of social housing. So let me start with Tye Reed. Tye Reed, that sounded like I said Tye Reed. Tye Reed, she is from Real Change. Tiffany Cross is here from Real Change. And Alice Woldt is here from our community. She has served in our community in the sector of homelessness for many years. So let me first off welcome the three of you to Heartbeat this evening. Thank you for joining me tonight and having this debate on air, live on the show to talk about this issue. Tye, let me start with you. Let me have you introduce yourself. You have 5 minutes. Let me also interject one thing here. So I'm going to let you each have 5 minutes, and then I'm going to start into the questions that I have prepared. We have a couple of commercial breaks, but I also want to make sure that when each of you speaks, the opposition has an opportunity, a 1 minute opportunity to rebut what you hear from the prior person so that we get the full scope of the issue on the table. Does that sound good? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Tye, let's start with you. Introduce yourself. You have 5 minutes. Talk to us who you are, why you're doing, what does Real Change do, and what's your position on this issue of social housing?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Cindi, for having me. I want to say first off, you did mess up a little bit for Tiffany's last name. It's McCoy, not Cross. I want to say that first.
Oh, Tiffany Cross is she is the Black. I'm so sorry, Tiffany. You're right. I'm sorry. I was watching her earlier today. My bad.
Yeah.
On live on air.
Tiffany
bad.
and I are co-chairs for House Our Neighbors. We started House Our Neighbors with a bunch of other community folks in 2021. This was before I worked at Real Change, which I currently do as the operations director. But Tiffany was the advocacy director and still is to this day. We started House Our Neighbors initially in response to the Compassion Seattle Charter Amendment that was going to be on the ballot in 2021. We were able to legally defeat that ballot defeat that charter amendment with the help of different organizations who came together to get it overturned out of court so that it would never make it to the ballot. But the entire time that we fought that initiative, we were spent the whole time wanting to say yes to something. And so we spent months after that no campaign ended and started working on the yes campaign, the yes to figure out what we can do to solve the housing affordability crisis in Seattle. And so as part of House Our Neighbors, we've been working on this, gathering signatures all of last year. We were on Converge earlier in 2022 to talk about the initiative and the signature gathering effort. And after all of the signatures were counted, we finally got an opportunity to be on the ballot in February. I think we're going to have a lot of deep dives into this initiative, and I hope a lot of the details that haven't come out that we haven't had a chance to speak about actually do, because I think that a lot of the conversation has been from a specifically like white media kind of lens. And I don't think it's allowed people who are Black or brown, who are working class, to actually have their questions answered and their concerns addressed. A lot of it has come from this, how will it pay for itself, and the financial mechanism. And I do think that stuff is important, and we'll talk about that tonight. But one of the things I want to make sure we focus on as the co-chair for House Our Neighbors, as someone who helped start this coalition, who was really dedicated to hearing the voices of those most affected by the housing and homelessness crises, is to focus on the parts of this initiative that are groundbreaking and radical in a United States perspective. Having tenant control of your housing, that is completely foreign to this country. Even in the best case scenarios of nonprofit housing, Section 8 housing, Section 9 housing, all kinds of subsidized housing that we do in the United States, tenants' voices aren't heard. Having that element where you can't just be evicted for no reason, that's important to me as well. So I want to go into the kind of practical matters that will affect people who will live in this housing, as well as talk about the financial mechanisms, which we've kind of talked about quite a bit.
I appreciate that opening statement. You are going to hear my questions are from the lens of the impacted community. So to your point, my questions are not from the traditional whitewashed way of looking at issues. My questions are about how, particularly from people who are impacted by that and their voice. That is the nature of the questions we have tonight, because I hear you, and I agree that this is why you see that sign up there that says Black Media Matters. Our voices matter, and that's why I wanted to have you all here. Tiffani, not Cross, Tiffani McCoy. I'm so sorry about that. Tiffani, let's hear from you.
All good. Thank you. And thanks for having us on. Tye did a really great job giving, the origin story of House Our Neighbors. And I'm Tiffani McCoy. I'm the co-chair with Tye, and I'm the advocacy director at Real Change, which provides low barrier employment opportunity to anyone who wants it. I'm sure that a lot of your audience has their favorite vendor that they buy the paper from. I've been in charge of the advocacy department there for just about 6 years now. And in that time, we have joined with the ACLU 2 times to try to stop the sweeps in the city of Seattle, because we know the trauma and harm that happens to our neighbors living outside when they're swept with no place to go, because we don't have enough shelter beds in the city. We don't have enough housing. It sounds like we'll get into that issue. And in that time, we've run public hygiene campaigns as well and fought for more tiny house villages, more transitional shelter, more permanently affordable shelter, more permanent housing, et cetera, et cetera. But, just about 6 years later, I don't see a lot of progress from when I started at Real Change about 6 years ago. And I still think of one of my first vendor organizing committee meetings, because we work directly with vendors on advocacy and policy. And I still remember a vendor who's actually was on a panel for why vendors support the initiative. And it was, this is all great and all this advocacy and policy, but we need housing. Like, are you guys going to build housing? Like, why doesn't Real Change build housing for its vendors? And I like made a note to myself at that moment, like someday I want to meet this person's desire. I want to meet this. Like I couldn't do it in my like second month on the job, but here we are now. That person is still a vendor. They're a really outspoken proponent of this, and it just feels really good to be able to work at a nonprofit that actually tries to push transformative change, not just kind of nibble around the edges. And that's what we're trying to do with the initiative. I-135, just to be very clear from the outset, would not solve any crises. It will not solve homelessness. It will not solve the housing crisis. However, it is a vision, and it is something that we should aspire to, and it is exciting, and we are building up a movement behind this for all of the subsequent changes that need to happen in order for housing to be viewed as a right and not a commodity. So again, thank you for having us.
Thank you for that explanation. And both Tiffani and Tye are on the pro side of I-135. And on the con side to it, let's welcome Alice Woldt in to introduce herself and your perspective or opening statements about this. Alice, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And sorry, the other two authors of the con side for the voters pamphlet and also for the op-ed in the Seattle Times are not here to voice their concerns as well. I'll first start with the first concern that I have is the duplication of effort. We have like maybe 3 dozen nonprofit housing developers in Seattle that are trying to meet the need and the crisis that we have on our streets. The second thing that I am concerned about is that this is not a priority, should not be a priority for how we spend money on housing right now. We have a homelessness crisis, we have a mental health, and we have a drug addiction problem that's obvious on the streets. People that are homeless are being taken advantage of in the encampments and wherever they are, in the doorways, in their tents, in their cars, in their RVs. And I really think that this is a much higher priority for the housing dollars that are not enough now to do what needs to be done. I came out here in 1975 with my ex-husband. He came out to be the director of the commission on redlining, to deal with redlining, banks not giving money to the Black people in our community. African Americans were not getting loans from banks. I can't believe that we are still in this situation where African Americans and other people of color are not being housed to the extent that white people are in this community. We have a growth problem, most recently with people at higher incomes. And now we have 50,000 people in our community that are below 50% or below median income, and 12,000 that are homeless. And this really should be the priority. The third thing is that I've heard from any number of people who know financing and they know what it takes to both establish a PDA and build housing and what the finances are like. And they have all said, this is not a good idea, that the financing will not be there. And as a matter of fact, there's been some talk about, well, this is like when we were going to build the monorail. And a lot of money was put into trying to do it, and then it all collapsed. And we surely don't want to spend money doing that again.
Thank you, Alice. I'm going to move my questions around a little bit just based on what I heard you each say. So I'm going to kind of pick up a little bit where you just left off, Alice. You talked about the economics of all of this, but let me just ask this question. Like, who in the city of Seattle, Now, before I ask that question, you also commented that there are several nonprofits here who have been focused on this issue. And I guess, my thought about it is, when you say that we have all these people who have been working on it, and yet we're here today where the problem is worse than it ever has been. And we've got so many nonprofits that are being led by white leadership, by white boards of directors. And yet we're still in a place right now where it's off the charts in terms of how many people are living out in the streets. Before we get into the economics of it, my question is, look, the majority of nonprofits, look, here's the question. Who in the city of Seattle is profiting from people remaining houseless? Because I could make a strong argument with all these nonprofits that are receiving all these public funds, all this public money. All this money is coming into white-led nonprofits, and the constituents and the people impacted by it. I don't know where their voice is. We're going to also talk about that. But who's profiting off of this? Because we can't possibly be at this point with the kind of money that has been poured into nonprofits here in the city of Seattle.
I don't know about the poured into the nonprofits. What I believe is that the city has made it pretty easy for private developers to make huge profits off of what has been in the past actually pretty affordable housing. I've been, a supporter of the Displacement Coalition for many years. And John Fox, the executive director, can quote you, numbers about how private developers don't really have to replace the housing that they destroy on one for one. That is, if they move a low-income person out and build some monstrous house in place of it, they're making money off of that house. And I think there are a lot of people that have moved here that are getting higher incomes. And I think that has also been a part of the problem. Rents have escalated along with the cost of housing. I am really supportive of land trusts and co-ops and actual, housing that people get a stake in, that they have some ownership of. And that ownership can be done for people who are not at the upper level, but at the lower level.
Let me ask that question to Tiffani and Tye also. Who in the city of Seattle, you heard my intro about, how many nonprofits we have here in the Seattle area that are obtaining public funds and public money. It is no secret that white-led nonprofits are getting disproportionate funding into their nonprofits than BIPOC-led nonprofits. And here we are. So who would you both say, how would you answer the question, who's benefiting, who's profiting off of homelessness not being solved here in the city of Seattle?
Yeah, I'll definitely take that first. I really appreciate that question. And I think it's been really important, especially as people who work for nonprofits, for Tiffani and I and other coalition members to not, demonize wholly all nonprofits. But I think that what you're pointing to is something that I've been desperate to talk about, having to do with the way that we've solved our housing crisis. At the Seattle Times editorial endorsement board meeting, John Fox told Tiffani and I that what we should have done with this was either support these nonprofits and getting more funds, or we should have created our own nonprofit. And therein is exactly the problem. I think we should be suspicious, like inherently suspicious of people who are recommending that the government doesn't do government work. When Alice or other, con or other opponents of this initiative, when they say that this is duplicative, that is not true because the city isn't doing housing work. What the city does is give money to private organizations, which are called nonprofits. And I really stress that when we talk about private developers, private corporations, nonprofits aren't part of that. Real Change is a private organization. We are not the city. The city could give us money, but we do what we want to do because we're a nonprofit. And so I think that this idea of who's benefiting, it's nonprofits and their CEOs who make $250,000 in order to take in a little bit of money, take the administrative fee, and then to barely serve people, right? To kind of put a Band-Aid. A lot of nonprofits provide financial services or non-tangible services to clients who, as someone who was a case manager at a very white-led nonprofit who got brought in millions of dollars and yet wasn't even present in the community. Most people have never heard of this nonprofit. All of my clients were single Black women. Every single one except for one who was a single Black dad. And that was everybody's clients. The whole entire housing department, our clients were single Black families. And I just think that this idea that they were somehow benefiting from millions and millions of dollars being poured into the housing, nonprofit industrial complex, that's concerning to me. I think the city should actually do the work and start building ourselves while nonprofits do what they've always done.
Tiffani, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add, and this is something I've been reflecting on the past couple of weeks that just really kind of makes me sad, is the question is a poignant one. And the answer, in addition to what Tye said, I even think some of what Alice said is true. While we're here in this room debating who is more deserving of affordable housing, or where our little bit of scraps that the government gives us in money should go, we're here. And the private market is out there gobbling up the rental market, buying up these homes out from under people, going into the central district and trying to overpay to displace people. The private market is thriving. Rents are through the roof. There's no cap on that. That can happen in perpetuity. And we're here debating, whether or not folks that make 80 to 120% should be able to have access to affordable housing. And I find it really sad.
Yes. I'm going to go take a quick commercial break and then come back with a couple of these are heavy questions, and they're charged. So I see the emotion in it. So let me just go to a quick commercial break and I'll come back because I want to pick up where you just left off, Tiffani.
Half that up in Saks, I favor Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yeah. Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Me and Besa, my girl, we had to pull up to Market Street Shoes once again, y'all.
And we do this every season. We have to get the new shoes, the new boots, and this time I even got a coat.
Yeah, no, you did walk in without a coat.
I really
I'm glad
did.
you found one. But their boots were on point.
Yes, the boots, the bags. I even grabbed a flannel.
Yeah, you did. And I was able to get some hats and everything. I was really impressed.
And I was impressed because, of course, I got those white boots that you guys see me wearing everywhere these days.
Yeah, no, I look at your white boots and I'm like, darn it, they only have one pair. Me and Besa wear the same size. Of course, every time we walk out with several bags in hand.
Several bags and sometimes even a backpack, you guys. Make sure you check out Market Street Shoes.
Yeah, please check them out. Where they go, Besa?
Ooh, 2232 Northwest Market Street, Seattle, Washington.
Welcome back to Heartbeat with a special edition this evening as we are hosting a debate on Initiative 135. I am your host, Cindi Bright. Initiative 135 is the social housing initiative that's on your ballots now here for the city of Seattle. So if you have your ballots in front of you and you have not yet voted, this ballot or this debate is for you so that you can hear both the pro and the con side to this argument. Representing this initiative tonight is Tiffani Reed. Nope, it's Tye Reed. I swear I rehearse the names and I blow them every time I say them this evening. Tye Reed, Tiffani McCoy, and Alice Woldt are here with us this evening. And an interesting first half. This is an interesting topic, and there's a lot of emotion around this because we are in a crisis here in the city of Seattle with the homelessness. I hate using that word, but our unhoused community and people who need housing. And we have been hearing from our elected officials and people year after year after year, and we're in a crisis right now. And so we wanted to talk about this evening because this is important for all of our voters, all of you who are listening to the show, to hear this and be able to vote and help solve the problem or not. So we heard quite a bit in the first half. I want to pick back up on the second half because one of my questions I had was what input from our communities have you each received on this issue? How have you brought the community into this equation? Who have you consulted with? And what is it that you're hearing that the community wants? And so let me start with you, Alice. How would you answer that question?
Well, I would answer the question that the three of us who are authors don't have an organized campaign. We're out there because we are concerned. We're concerned about the duplication of efforts, and I agree that there are likely a number of organizations that are trying to do what they're trying to do, which is to build more housing faster. But we're together, probably the three of us have spent close to 150 years, 140 plus years on low-income housing and trying to house the unhoused in this city. And I guess you could say, well, we're big failures too, but it has not been easy to do this in a city where the private development corporations have a huge leg up on the nonprofits. I was the director of a nonprofit for church council for almost 20 years. And we were always out there trying to fight what is happening now.
So before I ask Tiffani and Tye to respond to that, let me ask you a couple of follow-up questions to what you just said. You said, there's a group of you that have spent, I think, collectively 140 years, right? So, and you said your own words were, maybe we have failed. And so if that's the case, so let's just unpack that for a second. So we have all this money that's pouring into nonprofits. We have 140 years worth of experience at the table. And yet we're here in the worst crisis that Seattle has ever seen with its homelessness issue. So what harm is it to then try something different than what has historically been viewed as these are my words, but the traditional solutions to housing, when we can see here, and not just Seattle, you can see other cities where we continue to bring the same solutions to the table that have failed. And so why would we not try something completely different by the people who are part of this change are people who are impacted by it? Why won't we hear them? And why won't we try to do something completely different to help solve this problem? I'm just tagging on to what you said.
Well, I don't think that people are not being heard. I don't think that's true. I do think that there have been solutions out there that have not been that well funded. I don't think that nonprofits are rolling in money. A lot of them can't even get staff because they can't pay enough. The Housing Consortium is headed by a person of color. And I think a big part of it is that between the pandemic and the number of people that have moved here to enter the tech industry has really created a problem that was not anticipated, that the city was not up to dealing with the infrastructure needed to house the number of people that have moved here.
Is that right? I mean, like, I'm not trying to pin you, but I just want to talk about it. Like, the city does planning work. So let's just talk about the Amazons, the tech companies that are here. That's all done as part of a planning process from the city. So they do know that we have X amount of people coming in, and it's no secret that, major corporations are driving incomes up and creating a huger disparity.
Right.
And so given that, then how are we still here? That the planning has been done, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot,
well,
Alice. I'm
I
just
don't know
asking that.
I don't know that they planned for this, and
But they should have, and
there's-
I would think that they would have had these
Well,
conversations, right?
you would think they would.
Yeah.
But I also wonder about the conversations that maybe the pro folks, Initiative 135, have had with the Seattle Housing Authority.
Well, let me go to them because I want to finish the question I had asked about was about input from the community and what have you heard, and does this make sense with what you're hearing from the constituents, the people who are going to receive the benefit of this? Tiffany, do you want to, or either one of you can take it?
Start first because I already
Okay.
know what Tiffany's going to say, and I'm going to forget mine if I don't say it now. There's so much that Alice said that I would love to unpack, but I will start with the affected communities. When we first started House Our Neighbors, one of the first things I told Tiffany when we first had a phone call was that I didn't want executive directors, I didn't want institutionalized people in House Our Neighbors in the beginning to fight Charter Amendment 29 because I thought that they would go along with it, which we saw that a lot of people in nonprofits did go along with this, even though it was a devastating charter amendment. And so what we did was we focused on people who are affected by the crisis, people who work with Stop the Sweep Seattle, who are serving people every single day that are being swept on a daily basis, people who are actually direct service workers who are working as case managers, outreach workers with people living outside, people who work at nonprofits that do case management there or work at transitional housing units, people who themselves are poor or renters. I don't know about the no, but when Alice said, when you said, who did you reach out to the community? And Alice felt that it was okay to say just two other dudes, that to me should trigger something, right? There was no community input. And what happened was these three people decided to be in opposition to a community created solution to housing without any input from community, especially those affected, and then have gone on a misinformation campaign that has now convinced people who may not have heard about it or had some ignorance that somehow, some way they have an institution behind them supporting their no campaign. That is just objectively not true. She says it herself. It's three people who decided that they were concerned citizens who wanted to say no to a community-led solution. That needs to be investigated. That is extremely troubling when it comes to this last-minute no campaign. So we've got a lot of people who I think Tiffany can talk to, who we've talked to develop this. It wasn't just random. We didn't come up with these ideas on our own. Tiffany and Camille Gix, our advocacy intern at Real Change, and other people spent so many weeks actually fleshing out what does it mean to create social housing, what can we legally do, and what can we do that is more than even what some social housing places across the country are doing, which I would say is the tenant leadership. That's actually new even globally. So, you know, I think that the fact that we've actually got more than 3 people who are behind us who worked on this says a lot about where we're coming from for this initiative and what our intentions are.
Tiffany? Yeah.
Two very concrete examples of input. So we drafted this over many months. We actually looked at multiple countries, housing models, did 1-page briefs on them, talked about them all together as a group. And then there were a couple things that we wanted to get input on. So we reached out to the Housing Justice Project. They're the ones that are like, oh, you have to put something in this charter that eviction is not just an immediate arbitrary thing. It is deeply troubling and deeply disruptive to lives. So that's why we have this really strong, what's it called? Yeah, anti-eviction part in there, and that you just can't arbitrarily do it. There has to be some sort of justice on that, restorative justice on that. And then the second really concrete thing is we always knew we wanted to have a really high green standard for the buildings and that representative to be on the governing board. But it was community members, specifically from 350, that were like, you should have the Green New Deal Oversight Board actually be the committee that is electing the person to be on that governing board. And then also we have El Centro de la Raza that is going to serve on the board, which I've seen from opposition emails. That's called out as giving special privilege. They don't call out El Centro. They say some housing developer gets special privilege. See, to them, it is a privilege to uphold community in a governing board, where for us, that's just what we do. We uphold community members that are doing this in the governing board. So those are just some really concrete examples of feedback that we've received.
Thank you for that. One of my other questions, because Alice kind of made a comment about the economics, and I want to talk about the economics of this. But, my initial question was going to be, when you hear the term social housing, when you hear social attached to anything, automatically what people do is go, oh, that's just too far left, and that's just a bunch of people that are out of touch with business, with money, with economics. And oftentimes language that is said about BIPOC communities is that we don't have a clue about economics, and we don't know how to spend money, and we don't know how money works, and all the what I'm going to call colonized systems of injustice that have continued to perpetuate brown and Black people staying at the bottom because of that narrative that gets pitched. But I want you to talk about what is social housing? If you were to talk to the viewers about what is it, how does it work, how is it funded, how is it ongoing funded? Explain to the community what this all looks like so that people have a good understanding that this is, or is this just some wild idea that has no chance in hell of ever getting funded again? So can you speak to that? I'll start with you, Tiffany.
Yeah, I can speak to that. And I think that that's a really good segue. So really quickly and boil down into a sentence, social housing is housing that is decommodified, and it is publicly owned in perpetuity. It is seen as a public good as opposed to a commodity that you can make profit on. It's not just an asset on a balance sheet. When we were coming up with just the word social housing, we went back and forth. Should we just call it workforce housing? Should we call it social housing? Should we just call it public housing? But public housing has a horrendous track record. We don't at all want to even give a notion that we're trying to duplicate that. So in hindsight, after going to a social housing delegation in Vienna, maybe calling it municipal housing would have been a little bit cooler, but here we are. But yeah, simply boiled down, it's decommodified housing. In this country, we see housing as a commodity. Other countries around the world, not just in Europe, view housing as a public good. We want to start staking out a claim as housing as a public good. How it's going to be financed, it's going to do municipal bonds that just like other public developers have. And then I would say, for the audience, really importantly, we went into the initiative trying to pair a progressive revenue. We don't want any more property tax or sales tax or regressive taxes that hurt folks disproportionately. We wanted a progressive tax, but our lawyer said, public developers don't have taxing authority. You cannot give it taxing authority. So for us, it was a moment of okay, do we keep going forward if we can't have this? And there was enough. We could design the governing board, we could design the charter, we could design the income breakdowns. Like, there was so much good for us to do in this initiative to set up the structure and the vision to then go get funding. So that's what we're doing with this. And then I'd say, second of all, Representative Chop is putting forward money this budget cycle at the state for 2 years of operational costs from day one. The developer can start tapping into the Build Back Better, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's hundreds of millions of dollars sitting there for green buildings. So tapping into those while we continue working on a progressive revenue source. We have one that we're vetting through our lawyer right now. We're not going to talk about what that is, but I think one thing that people just in the city keep underestimating, like the coalition, and I kind of welcome that.
And just before I ask you, Tye, to comment also, and Alice, is it my understanding that what's different about this type of housing is, in contrast to Section 8 housing, which is public housing, Section 8 housing, people can earn their way out of being able to stay in Section 8 housing. So you get to income thresholds and then you're gone. And then the perpetual cycle of brown and black poverty continues, because we continue in the cycle of 58 cents to the dollar and all the other systemic not having access to health care. So am I correct in that this type of housing doesn't earn you out? You're able to stay in the housing. Tye, do you want to comment to that?
Yeah, I think that's really important to me because, like, to be frank, like a lot of Black people in this country, I grew up pretty poor. And I remember my mom never earning too much money because Section 8 is like a golden ticket. Everybody will call it that. I have many problems with Section 8, but if I had a client who had a Section 8 voucher, great, because even if they made $0, they weren't going to have to worry about rent. Then we can have a whole conversation about who will accept the vouchers if they can get into housing. But assuming you get placed, that was great. And I just remember, whenever my mom would think about finances, or as we move place to place, it was like, always look for a job, but never actually find a job so you can make sure you stay on unemployment. Never take a job that is going to make you earn so much that you actually have to pay for you and your 4 kids to live somewhere. And that's kind of what we subjected everybody in this city to, right? Like, a lot of my clients would do jobs under the table because they want to be able to show as little income as possible so that they have a guaranteed income, because there's either you're living on literally $772 is the max TANF, a disbursement you can get, or you have to make enough money to pay for $2,000 one bedroom. There is no in between. There is no guarantee. And there are a lot of programs, all of the nonprofit based programs, all of the current programs that are just subsidies, they kick you off when you make a different amount of money. So we're telling people to relocate, to find themselves deeper and deeper into poverty, find ways to navigate that system rather than show that there is a pathway out of that. And I think that is extremely important. That benefits cliff isn't just for housing. It's for medical things. It's for, like, the same reason people who are disabled don't get married. There are many ways that these kinds of means-tested benefits cliffs hurt people and ensure that they stay oppressed and in poverty.
Alice, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what both of them just said, and then respond to the whole question about how you view and your team or the people that you referred to view the economics of this issue.
Well, I think for one thing, we do have mixed income housing in this city. The Seattle Housing Authority actually displaced 2,000 low-income people when they did the Hope 6 projects. I am not a person that's in favor of the displacing people because they start earning a little more money. And I don't think it's true that every housing agency in this city does that. I was at a building that Plymouth Housing owns and has built. And as a matter of fact, it was built fairly quickly because the city has realized that they can't do all these restrictions and create all these problems. And they have moved up the timeline. And so this building was built in 2021 started, and it was open at the end of 2022. And that was with getting the financing together and everything. It is permanent housing, and they are not kicking people out when they earn any more money. And it is for formerly people who are unhoused. So that's just one instance that I know of. But I know that there are other housing developers in the city that, because of the financing, that they have to do mixed housing. They have to do mixed income housing to be able to afford to have the number of units that they need for the really low income. So that's my sense that I think we went through a period with the federal government, starting with Reagan, that mental health treatment could be done out in the community, but the community was never given the money to do the mental health treatment. We were promised, oh, okay, let's get rid of the Cabrini Greens. Well, Seattle's never had a Cabrini Green. I lived outside of Chicago. I know what Cabrini Green was like.
What is that? I don't
Cabrini Green was a huge public housing run by the Chicago Public Housing Authority. And I would say at the time that, yes, most of the people that were in those big, huge public housing places were people of color. And it was a good way for the cities to not have to spend any money, because they figured, like Tiffany said, those people didn't have a voice. And Tye also said they didn't have a voice. And they were considered by the community as totally non-essential. And so I think we've come a ways from that, and we don't have Cabrini Greens anymore. But the Section 8 housing also, like Tye said, put people in a place where that's what they had to live on. That's what they had to for housing.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe there are kinds of housing that people can get invested in that include land trusts, co-ops, co-housing, where people feel like, yes, they're a part of a community, but they don't necessarily have to have the amount of money that some of the people that they're living with have to have, so that they can maintain their housing.
Well, let me ask do you want to? Yeah, go ahead, Tiffany.
I have to touch on this because it's really important to voters to know, because the opposition continues to talk about duplication, regardless of us proving over and over that this isn't duplicative, they keep saying it. So these are the ways that this is not duplicative, and these are the ways that this is completely different from anything we do with affordable housing. First, we don't have a housing that's affordable to folks making between usually 60 to 120% of the area median income. That includes educators, architects, teachers, nurses, etc. We don't have that in the city at all. Those folks are meant to just go duke it out on the private market. That's one way. The second way is permanently affordable and publicly owned forever. So it's very often for folks that are doing affordable housing and when they're dependent on federal financing mechanisms. When that money runs out from the federal government, those buildings are not able to be floated sustainably anymore. Unfortunately, then those nonprofits are put into a position where they have to sell those because they can't make the income cover it anymore. So we're setting these things up to fail by having the developer that says in the charter that this cannot be sold off. So this is a public good forever. That is not something that we have enshrined anywhere in our housing in the city of Seattle. We don't have a tenant-run governing board. We don't have the ability to only pay 30% of your income in rent. We don't have the highest green standards on new buildings that are coming forward. We don't have restorative justice, et cetera, et cetera. This is not duplicative unless we're just saying it is another PDA. Yes, it is going to be another PDA, but it is going to have all of these fundamentally different structures and visions and values that it is going to carry forward. So I just think it's really important to touch on that.
Thank you for that. Before I want to ask one final question, and I'm going to ask you to each keep your responses to 1 minute, because I'm also going to give you some time to do a closing argument, if you will. but I can't, this was not a planned question, but just listening to the three of you talk, I just want to ask this question. Um, is the opposition to this issue more, and I'll put in quotation marks, personal? Is it more personal because we have had so many people that have had their hands in this pie and their hands in the pie have failed? Is it because we have BIPOC people now rising up with options and solutions to put out there for our communities? Is this why there is a visceral reaction to trying something different in our communities? Alice, 60 seconds.
I would say absolutely not. I think the opposition to this is from people who know the finance problems and know that the bonding problems and that we don't live in a social democracy. We live in a capitalist country. And social democracies have basic needs that people's basic needs are met. You don't see hungry people. You don't see homeless people. We need some really fundamental changes. And I mean, in this state, the tax structure. We need more control over corporations. I was the executive director of Fixed Democracy First. We began with Washington Public Campaigns and to get money out of politics, because a lot of what happens comes because there's money there and there's money for candidates, and candidates then do what the money tells them to do. So, those changes I think are really fundamentally needed. And the social housing issue for me, it feels to me like this is a little bit pie in the sky right now when we have to have real housing needs met and real personal services needs met.
Thank you. Tiffany, would you respond to that? The question was, is it personal? But, you guys are in the trenches with this. And Alice raises a fair point around regressive tax system, who's not paying their fair share of taxes, but comment about what you just heard. So.
Yeah, I'll go. Because I have many things to say. I think we should take Alice at her word. I think we should listen to what Alice is saying about what she does and doesn't want to see in the city of Seattle. Cabrini Green style housing. For better or worse, public housing that was originally built during America's probably best moments, if there could be any, they actually did serve Black and brown people and poor people. We had deep investments in anti-poverty programs for a really long time that built up those Cabrini Green style housing. And what she's saying is she doesn't want dense, tall buildings in her city. So I ask, where are we supposed to go? Of course, no offense to Tiffany, but she is a homeowner, and I'm assuming Alice is a homeowner. Maybe you're a homeowner. I'm a renter. I will not be able to afford to live in Seattle forever. My rent is $1,800 for a one bedroom. And so I think this question of, is it personal? It's always personal for me. This is why I'm deeply invested in this work and why I do it. But it's clearly personal for Alice and her cohort too. They do not want Seattle to change. They want to blame the tech industry as if high-paid tech workers are the reason the Seattle hasn't invested. Like you said, Cindi, the city could be investing. The city should be doing something. And they have no response to why not the city? Why just nonprofits? How much are we supposed to give to nonprofits in order to dig ourselves out of 50 to 80,000 unit deficit? Is that trillions of dollars to nonprofits? Kajillions of dollars? There is no plan. And so I think we should listen to what they're saying and take them at face value. That is personal for them too. They do not want the city to change, and they do not want to welcome people who are struggling to live here, like me, who I'm not poor. I don't make 0 to 30%, but I'm going to be pushed out of the city eventually. So maybe people don't end up on the streets, but they're not going to be in Seattle. They're going to be commuting into this city that is going to be created for homeowners, not just people who make a bunch of money. So I think that I don't disagree with anything that Alice said. I think she told us exactly how she feels and exactly how the opposition feels.
All right. Well, I appreciate the three of you. I feel some energy flying in the room here today as we talk about it. A very difficult topic. I want to say a couple things. I want to thank all three of you for being in this space, because this space requires all hands on deck, and this space requires, from my perspective, radical change. The path that we have been on, I don't have time to comment. If I told you the rent that I have paid on the east side, which is 4 times what you quoted, what you pay, I'm affirming to you, we have a problem. There is no question about that. And it's not just Seattle, it is the outlying areas also that are pushing service workers and firefighters and public safety people away. It is at a crisis state, so I recognize that. I'm going to give you, and I'm going to hold you to it because I will interrupt you. I'm going to give you 60 seconds as a closing statement before I make a final statement to our audience. Go, Alice.
Thank you, and thank you to viewers who have listened to this. I will just say, like I said at the outset, that I feel like this is duplicative, and those of us who are opposed are not opposed to changes, but we don't want to see changes that go belly up when we already have the services here that, if they were fully funded and did what they say they're doing, would be able to get a hold of the crisis that we face in this city with the unhoused and with mentally ill and with people who need services for drug addiction.
Thank you, Alice. Tiffany?
Yeah, I want to say that, like, I'm definitely picking up on the thread of the opposition really wanting to, like, tackle the visible homelessness issue, and that is the purview of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. So I really do hope that they get the money they need to meet those ends. But for us, this initiative, this movement is about creating a Seattle where all can afford to live and thrive. It's about creating a bold vision, staking out in this capitalist country, housing as a public good, where folks don't have to commute 30 to 60 minutes a day, barely having time with their kids, barely having time for their own personal ventures because they're traveling back and forth to work. Also doing more climate pollution, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to be able to invest in something radical. We need to invest in housing as a public good. This initiative is not going to get us there overnight, but we have a lot of more work to do if we do want this city to not just become one of, like, the most gross inequality that we can ever imagine.
Thank you, Tiffany.
So
Tye?
please vote yes. Sorry, I don't know if I can.
We'll just look at your sticker. First off, thank you, Cindi. This has been an extremely great conversation. And I would, if I was going to talk to the audience, I would say I implore people to not be as deeply cynical as the opposition has shown themselves to be. It is really life or death for a lot of people who are in this coalition, and I don't think we have much to lose if this fails. Honestly, worst case scenario, $750,000 that they're planning to do in-kind costs might blow into the wind, and we set up something that doesn't become of anything. But really what's happening is that this place is not affordable for people to live, and I have not heard Alice or her opposition address people who are not living in extreme or moderate poverty about what we're supposed to do. So I implore everybody to demand the city, not nonprofits, not private developers, the actual government that we pay taxes to take on this challenge. We have put this off onto private entities in the form of nonprofits and developers and charities for so long that we are confused about why this problem still exists. The problem is because government's not doing their job. So don't blame tech workers, don't blame nonprofits. The government should be doing something, and this is going to make the government do something. And what we do next will ensure that they actually follow through once everybody votes yes on I-135, February 14th. Thank you.
Well, thank you to the three of you for joining me tonight for this spirited conversation, and to our viewers who joined the show this night or who will be watching the show over the next few days. Your ballots, if you're in the city of Seattle, your ballots are in your box. If you have not voted on it, you've now heard from Alice Woldt, Tiffani, and Tye. I'm just going to say there, I'm just Tiffani McCoy, Tye Reed, all working on this issue. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I encourage you to join us next week. Also, next week, we will be hosting the newly elected chair of the Washington Democrats. Shasti Conrad is going to come on with us in the first half. She is a progressive politician, so it is going to be fascinating to hear what's on her docket, especially after hearing the State of the Union last night. So thank you all for joining us tonight and bearing with us as we ran a little bit over. Have a good week. We will look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday.
Half that up in sacks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody.